A man who almost blew a plane out of the sky with his own shoes, a genius whose ideas were treated like weapons, and an escape artist who mailed himself out of prison. Today we're talking about more scary, evil prisoners. When people talk about the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, the name Timothy McVeigh is usually the one that comes up first, but McVeigh did not act alone. Terry Nichols was the guy behind the scenes who made the whole thing possible. He wasn't the one who parked the truck, but he was the logistical expert who spent months gathering supplies and helping to mix the explosives. After he was caught, a jury couldn't agree on a death sentence, so he ended up with 161 consecutive life sentences. Today, he lives at ADX Florence. His cell is tiny, he spends 23 hours a day inside it, he doesn't get to see other prisoners, and his access to the outside world is almost entirely cut off, and rightfully so. In late 2001, just a few months after the September 11th attacks, a man named Richard Reed boarded a flight from Paris to Miami. To the other passengers, he just looked like a tall, slightly unkempt guy in a bulky coat, but halfway across the Atlantic, a flight attendant noticed him trying to strike a match. When she looked closer, she realized he was trying to light a fuse sticking out of his sneaker. Turned out he had hidden plastic explosives inside the hollowed-out soles of his hiking boots. Passengers and crew ended up tackling him and tying him down using belts and headphone cords, whatever they could find, before he could set it off. The FBI later found the explosives were sophisticated enough to have taken down the entire plane. The fuse hadn't been damp from his own sweat. Reed didn't just get a life sentence, he got 3 of them, plus another 110 years. He was sent straight to the Supermax in Colorado and put under special administrative measures. This means the government monitors every single thing he does. He isn't allowed to talk to the media, and even his lawyers have to be careful about what they repeat. The feds are worried that because he's so dedicated to his cause, he could use a simple letter or phone call to send coded instructions to people on the outside. So he lives in a section of the prison where his window is angled so he can only see a small patch of sky. He's been in that environment for over 20 years now. In the world of the Chicago mob, James Marcello was as high as you could get. He was the boss of the Chicago Outfit, the same criminal organization Al Capone used to run. Marcello wasn't a loud, flashy criminal. He was quiet, he was cold, professional, he stayed under the radar for decades. He was finally brought down during a massive investigation in 2007 called the Family Secrets Trial. The federal government used a member of his own family to testify against him, which connected him to several hits from the 70s and 80s. When he was sentenced to life, the authorities didn't put him in a regular high-security prison. They knew that a man with his connections and money would be able to bribe guards or run his crew from a standard cell, so they sent him to the Supermax in Colorado, kept him in a unit where he has zero contact with other inmates. David Paul Hammer became a nightmare for the federal system because of how dangerous he was while already behind bars. Hammer was serving time for various offenses when he made 2 brief escapes in the 80s. Then he was moved to a high-security prison in Pennsylvania. While there, he managed to convince his cellmate, Andrew Marty, to participate in what he claimed was a mock training exercise for another escape. Instead, Hammer used a piece of homemade cord to end the other man's life. After that incident, he was sent to death row in 1998, but Hammer was a master manipulator who spent years playing with the heads of investigators. He would claim he had secret insider information about the Oklahoma City, leading the FBI on long, expensive investigations just to see if he was telling the truth. He used these claims to get better perks in prison or to stall his legal proceedings, and when he strangled another inmate in 2018, he was moved to ADX Florence. He spent years in a tiny room with a camera watching him every single second. He died in 2019, having spent 40 years of his life in prison, the majority of which was in solitary confinement. Simon Trinidad wasn't a typical American criminal. He was a top leader for a guerrilla army in South America called the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC. This was a massive group that spent decades involved in intense conflict. The US government got involved after Trinidad's group took 3 American contractors into custody after their plane went down in the jungle. The FBI worked for years to get him extradited to the United States to face charges. Once they got him on US soil, they didn't take any chances with where they housed him. He was sent to the Supermax. The authorities believed that if he were able to communicate freely, he could give orders to his fighters back home. For years, His legal team complained that he was kept in such a state of isolation that he wasn't even allowed to have a radio or a newspaper in his native language. The government has basically made him disappear from the public eye. For nearly 20 years, a man known as the Unibomber lived in a tiny wooden cabin in the mountains of Montana. From there, he sent explosives through the mail to people he believed were pushing society toward a technological disaster. When the FBI finally caught him in 1996, they found a man who was a mathematical genius but also obviously very dangerous. He was sent to ADX Florence for life, and the government treated his mind like it was a loaded weapon. The feds were so concerned about his ability to influence people that they took extreme measures to keep him quiet. For a while, he was neighbors with other high-profile inmates, but when the guards realized they were actually talking through the vents and sharing ideas, the security was tightened even further. They didn't want Kaczynski to radicalize anyone else in the prison. He spent the rest of his life in a cell that was almost the exact same size as the cabin he lived in as a fugitive. The FBI made sure his writings stayed out of the hands of other prisoners to prevent his ideas from spreading. He wanted to change the world with his actions, so the government made sure that his world was limited to 4 concrete walls until he died in 2023.
He emptied his bank account, crossed countries in a hurry, and then was found steps from a hotel he never checked into. July 1996, Blair Adams, 31, leaves Surrey, British Columbia in visible distress. Over several days, he withdraws cash and valuables, tries to enter the US by ferry and is turned back, then makes it across the border, flies to Washington, D.C., and finally ends up in Knoxville, Tennessee. Hotel cameras capture him loitering in the lobby. He pays for a room with cash, walks out, and never uses the key. The next morning, he's found in the lot of an under-construction hotel across the interstate. Cash from 3 countries is scattered nearby. Investigators say his injuries point to a violent encounter, and the medical examiner lists a fatal injury as the cause. No robbery, no clear motive. A composite sketch is released of a man witnesses saw speaking with him outside a nearby restaurant, but nothing definitive follows. To this day, the timeline is crisp and the reason is foggy. Did Blair run from someone real or from a fear that spiraled as he crossed borders? The unanswered piece is the person he met in Knoxville that night. The case remains open. A bright orange fire lights up the water off Craig, Alaska, and with it a mystery that refuses to die. It is September 1982. The Investor, an $850,000 fishing boat, is seen burning near Craig. When responders reach the vessel, they find 8 people passed away on board. The owner and family were on that trip along with 4 crew members. The scene is devastating and confusing. Who set the boat ablaze? Who pulled the trigger before the fire? Witness accounts describe a suspicious person leaving the dock in a skiff that morning. A local man would eventually be put on trial and later acquitted. No one else has been convicted. There is no clear motive that ever stuck, and decades later, the official line from investigators is simple: the case is closed. The reality for locals is different. It remains the state's worst unsolved mass killing at sea and one of the most unsettling cold cases on the Pacific coast. Someone left that harbor and simply disappeared into the islands. A scientist writes 1 observation per minute. Then the pen goes quiet at 10 a.m. In September 1986, 28-year-old graduate researcher Jane Marie Pritchard drives to Blackbird State Forest in Delaware to study the hog peanut vine. She parks near the visitor center, steps into the trees with her gear, and does what she always does. She documents sunlight, leaf angle, and growth behavior. The entries roll in like clockwork. Then at 10 a.m., the notes end. Later that day, hikers spot her in the underbrush. A shotgun was used. Investigators quickly rule out a hunting accident and assemble a timeline built from interviews with squirrel hunters and other visitors. One man, Michael Lloyd, tells police he talked to Jane and saw her speaking with another man. His description leads to a composite sketch. Hair and fiber evidence is collected. Then technology catches up. Early DNA testing excludes Lloyd, and he is released after months in jail. The case moves to the cold case shelves, but not into oblivion. Detectives have said there is testable physical evidence still preserved. The path through the forest is short. The window of time is small. It is a solvable timeline if the right person speaks or if modern testing hits. A storm pounds Oahu and a missing license triggers a theory that changes the whole case. January 1982, Lisa Au, a 19-year-old beautician, leaves dinner with her boyfriend in Honolulu and drives towards Killao. It is a rough night on the roads. The next morning, she does not show. Her family sounds the alarm, and they eventually find her car with the driver's window down and pooled rainwater inside. Her purse is on the seat. Her license and registration are not in it. Weeks later, a jogger finds Lisa off a mountain road near Tantalus. Decomposition prevents a clear cause of death, and early theories point at a police impersonator because of the missing license. That angle burns bright until a simple fact surfaces. Lisa had used her license to write a check at a grocery store the evening she vanished and ended up leaving it there. Investigators look hard at the boyfriend. He cooperates and even takes lie detector tests, which he does not pass. He says guilt over not driving her home explains it. Witnesses recall a car on the mountain road around 2:30 a.m. with a man driving and a sleeping woman in the passenger seat. Later, the same car is seen again without the woman. That witness says no one followed up with her. The case stays open. The storm that night washed away more than footprints. It washed away a clear path to answers.
Most people on this list are here because they're violent, but Richard McNair is here because he's an escape artist. All started in the late 80s in North Dakota during a robbery that went sideways. McNair ended up taking someone's life and was handed 2 life sentences. Most people would accept their fate at that point, but not McNair. His first escape was almost like a movie. He used lip balm to grease up his wrists, and he slipped right out of his handcuffs at the police station and just ran. He was caught, but a few years later, he crawled through a ventilation duct to get out of a state penitentiary. His most legendary move happened in 2006, though. He was working in a prison warehouse where they repaired mailbags. Well, he managed to build himself a shipping pod with a breathing tube, hid inside it, and then he had himself mailed out of the prison on a pallet. After he got out, he was actually stopped by a police officer while running down some railroad tracks, but he was so calm and charming that he just convinced the officer he was a jogger out for a run. He stayed on the run for over a year, traveling all the way to Canada before the feds finally caught up with him. In the mid-90s, Kristen Gilbert was a nurse at a veterans hospital in Massachusetts. To the families of the patients, she seemed like a dedicated professional, but behind closed doors, she was using her medical knowledge to do something unthinkable. Gilbert had an obsession with the adrenaline of emergency situations, so she wanted to create them herself. She would inject her patients' IV bags with massive doses of epinephrine, a stimulant that makes the heart race. This would cause the patients to go into cardiac arrest, triggering a code blue emergency. At first, the other nurses didn't suspect anything sinister. They did notice that people seemed to pass away more often when she was on the clock, but they couldn't fathom her actually causing patients harm. They gave her the nickname Angel of Death, though, as a dark joke. But the more it happened, the less funny that dark joke became. It wasn't until 3 other nurses officially raised concerns about the high number of deaths and a shortage of epinephrine that an investigation finally started. And in that investigation, they finally found Gilbert responsible. She was eventually convicted and sent away for life. Krista Pike is one of the youngest women ever to be sent to federal death row, and when you hear about what she did, it's easy to see why. Back in 1995, she was only 18 years old and living in Tennessee. She became convinced that one of her classmates, Colleen Slemmer, was trying to steal her boyfriend, Tatterall Shipp. Instead of just dealing with the drama like a normal teenager, Pike recruited her boyfriend and another friend to help her carry out her deadly plan. They lured Slemmer to an abandoned area under the pretense of making peace, and then for over 30 minutes, Pike and Shipp attacked the girl. Pike was reportedly obsessed with the occult and dark symbolism at the time, and during all this, she used a piece of broken pot to carve a pentagram into Slemmer's chest. After taking Colleen Slemmer's life, Pike didn't even try to hide it. She actually carried a piece of her skull around in her pocket and showed it off to people at school. Not only did she have zero remorse, she was proud of herself. She was soon arrested and given the death penalty. And she's been sitting on death row ever since, and at the time of recording this, she's set to finally be executed in about 5 months. Danny Munoz Mosquera was the top hitman for Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel back in the 80s and 90s. The FBI ended up putting a massive target on his back after he was connected to the of Avianca Flight 203. The cartel had planted a device on the plane to take out a politician, but the ended up taking out everyone on board, 107 people in total. Since 2 of those people were Americans, the US government made it their personal mission to hunt him down. When they finally caught him in New York, he was hit with 10 life sentences plus another 45 years. Feds didn't just want him locked up. They wanted him somewhere he couldn't ever escape. Back in Colombia, Mosquera had already escaped from high-security prisons twice. The Bureau of Prisons knew that if there was even a tiny crack in the security, he would find it. That's why he was one of the very first guys moved to ADX Florence when it opened. Everything is automated, it's controlled by computers, so there's no keys he can steal, or there's no guards he can get to. He's been in total lockdown for over 30 years now, and that's where he's gonna be for the rest of his days. Edmund Kemper was and still is a pretty intimidating looking guy, standing at 6'9", and that combined with his above average IQ and his calm demeanor, well, means this guy was incredibly dangerous, as he could lure his victims in and take advantage of them with his size. And in interviews, which there are plenty of, that calm, dare I say it, engaging personality really comes through, and that is very scary.
It started with surrogates at a non-human level. Physical objects, my possessions, other people's, destruction of things that are cared about. And then it's destruction of things that are living on a lower level, small animals, insects, animals, and then finally people.
Known as the co-ed killer, he targeted female college students in the early 70s, usually hitchhikers, then did things so horrific to their bodies afterward, it's just better left unsaid. What makes his interviews so chilling is how casually he talks about all of this stuff. And asked why he started, Kemper said, "I just wondered what it would be like to shoot grandma." He was 15 years old when he did exactly that, taking out both grandparents just to see how it felt. Later, in an interview with FBI agents, Kemper calmly described what he did to his mother, and he made one of the most chilling statements I've ever heard.
I cut off her head, and I humiliated her corpse.
What's really eerie about Kemper, aside from how damn normal he sounds while talking about some of the most twisted things you can imagine, is how oddly self-aware he is in his interviews. He's so self-analytical, so different from guys like Charles Manson who just come off like these unhinged lunatics. Kemper once said he knew he was a walking time bomb. He knew exactly how dangerous he was, but he didn't hide from it. It's one thing to commit horrific acts, it's another to know what you're doing is evil and to just accept and embrace it anyway. Gary Michael Hilton just recently confessed on camera to a crime everyone pretty much knew he was responsible for, but he'd never actually come out and said it. Known as the National Forest serial killer, Hilton used his survival skills to hide in plain sight while targeting people in remote parks across multiple states. His crimes stretched from Georgia to Florida to North Carolina, and yet for years no one connected the dots. Hilton finally broke his silence in an interview at 78 years old, saying simply, "It's time." Staring right into the camera, he admits to something he denied for 17 years.
I'm gonna give you a news scoop. I did it. So there you have it.
You did it.
Yes, I'm confessing to a murder on camera.
When asked why now, his response was just because I'm going to die soon. He also had no issue labeling himself. Sort of. When the interview asked if he was a psychopath, Hilton replied, "No." Sociopath? He said, "I have part of that in me." And when the term serial killer was brought up, he dismissed it, just saying it was no big deal, or a dime a dozen. In June of 2018, Matthew Haverly stood in front of local news cameras outside his home in Bradford County, Pennsylvania. A body had been discovered in a nearby creek, and reporters were gathering interviews with residents to get their reactions. Haverly gave the impression of a guy just as shocked as everyone else, casually throwing around theories and going into all this detail about how it was probably a hit and that it would be a good place to dump a body.
It would be like a place where people from the city would want to put a body because most likely they wouldn't be found.
He even addressed how
The whole time he has this slight smirk on his face. He's just saying way too much. He's attempting to rock a mohawk, except he's balding. The guy would just be on my list of suspects immediately, and unsurprisingly, it turned out he killed the woman in the creek. What was surprising was that it was his own mother. Authorities later determined she'd been struck in the head and dumped in the creek behind their home. He ended up pleading no contest to charges including involuntary manslaughter, tampering with evidence, and more. Gary Ridgway, dubbed the Green River Killer, targeted women in Washington state from the early 80s to the late 90s. He'd pick up women, earn their trust, and then take their lives in secluded areas. Ridgway later admitted that he chose his victims carefully, often targeting those less likely to be reported missing right away. In his interviews, what's most disturbing isn't just what he says, it's how casually he says it. At one point, Ridgway admits he used a photo of his son to get his victims to feel comfortable.
Every time I opened up my wallet, there would be a picture of my son on one side, behind my ID, here's my ID, and I hide my name, and they'd see that, and that would lower any big defenses.
In another moment, he describes a time he picked up a woman while his son was sleeping in his car. I killed her, he says flatly, and I'm real sure my son didn't see it. Ridgway confessed to so many killings he said he lost count. Some believe the real number may be as high as 90. In court, Ridgway showed little emotion except when the families of his victims spoke, and even then, it was hard to tell if it was real remorse or just a show.
So what do you got? You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
In this video, a man named Robert Pickton is seen in his jail cell boasting about his heinous crimes. And what crimes were those? Well, let me just start by saying that Robert Pickton's case doesn't even sound like something that happens in real life. It just seems too gruesome to be real. A pig farmer in British Columbia, Canada, Pickton was found to be behind a series of unspeakable crimes. It started with the disappearances of women, many of them working in the downtown east side area of Vancouver. Eventually, Pickton's farm, a large, isolated piece of land, became the focal point of the investigation. When a search was carried out in 2002, they found human remains. Some were identified, others were found mixed into meat he'd make sausages with. See, Pickton's parties, which he often threw on the farm, had become a major red flag. He'd lure women there, usually street workers, and a lot of them would never leave. He was convicted of 6 crimes in 2007, but it's believed that Pickton may have been responsible for far more than he was charged with. Authorities didn't have enough evidence to convict him on those, though. I'd never heard of this guy until today, Samuel Little. Turns out he's one of America's most prolific serial killers, and man, the way he describes his crimes is chilling. He sounds like this friendly grandfather telling stories about his younger days. He has this inviting smile, he makes jokes, he comes off as such a pleasant guy. Really nuts. And it also makes sense. It's how he was able to charm his victims before killing them.
My legs and pull to the water. That's the only one that I ever killed by drowning.
So Samuel Little killed women across the United States from like the 70s to the mid-2000s. He took so many lives. 5 years back, this series of prison interviews were released where he was talking about several of his crimes and the victims, most of which were women. He was convicted of 8 killings but confessed to 93. He died in 2020.
I was living there?
Yeah, Lauren was my neighbor. We're just trying to find out where she is at this point. I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday.
Stephen McDaniel was a law student. He had a major crush on his neighbor, Lauren Giddings, a crush that soon became an obsession. Giddings went missing in June of 2011, and during an interview with a local reporter, Daniel speculated about her disappearance as though he were just another concerned citizen. But after hearing that a body had been found during the investigation, McDaniel's face went cold, and he had to sit down. Now, this alone didn't raise any red flags. He knew the victim, so finding out that her lifeless body was found just outside your apartment, that would be shocking for anyone. But McDaniel was concerned for a whole other reason. McDaniel had killed her. Authorities later searched his apartment, where they found evidence linking him directly to Giddings' death, like videos taken outside her window. Later, he confessed to strangling and dismembering her body.
I mean, The last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
I've probably done anything a man would want to do with a woman. Obviously, I must be sick somehow.
That is Richard Francis Cottingham, aka the Torso Killer and the Times Square Ripper. Operating mainly in New York and New Jersey during the 60s and 70s, Cottingham targeted women in ways that were deliberately gruesome, earning his nickname because of how he left a lot of the scenes. Again, this is another one of those killers who sounds so nonchalant when describing all the vile things they did, and talking about his double life. Respectable family man by day, something entirely different by night. He openly admits that he used his charm to get close to people, before turning into someone completely unrecognizable. In this clip, the interviewer asks Richard why he removed a certain body part from one of his victims, and this was his response.
To do something different. I mean, she was already dead. I mean, it wasn't something that she was alive. And I wanted to create a sensationalism.
Stephen Port might not look like the kind of person you'd expect to end up on a list like this, which is exactly what made him so dangerous. On the surface, he was a quiet, unassuming chef living in London, but between 2014 and 2015, he was secretly targeting young men through dating apps, luring them in with lies, before taking their lives, performing heinous acts on the corpses, and leaving their bodies nearby, sometimes right outside his own building. In police interviews, he comes off nervous but weirdly casual, constantly changes his story, insisting he just found the body. At one point he says, "He was just lying there. I didn't know what to do." Over and over, painting himself as this clueless bystander. But the biggest gut punch is that police initially believed him. For months he got away with this, even though the deaths were happening in the same area under suspiciously similar circumstances. When the truth finally came out, it turned out he'd tampered with evidence and lied repeatedly to cover his tracks. The interviews with him are hard to watch, not because he's angry or aggressive, but because he's emotionless, even when describing the moments after each victim died.
Did you write this letter, dear CRT 11?
No, did the
Photos of it is found with Daniel.
No.
Arthur Shawcross, also known as the Genesee River Killer, is one of the most unsettling interview subjects ever recorded, and I know that sounds like something people just say. I really mean it in this case. He talks about taking people's lives like he's reading off a shopping list. In one interview, when asked about his victims, he shrugs and says, "I just snapped." That phrase comes up again and again as if it somehow explains everything. Here he is talking about what one of his victims tasted like.
Take a fresh ham, a roast pork, and it's the butt end where it's a little burnt. That's what you taste like.
He describes the acts in graphic detail, almost as if he's proud of them at points, and then immediately he'll change the subject to like trivial stuff like food or movies. It's very jarring, but through it all, there's never any emotion, no reflection. He's just completely flat and cold. Shawcross claimed he had a troubled past and tried to blame his actions on brain damage, but psychologists who have interviewed him says that he shows classic signs of manipulation and just lacks empathy. Watching him talk, it's clear he wasn't out of control, he just didn't care.
Hours after a guilty verdict, a man writes a goodbye note and goes missing. On October 31st, 1990, a minor collision near a seaside park in Rhode Island sets off a chain of events that no one can take back. Adam C. Emery believes his car was struck. He and his wife confront another driver, Jason Bass, in a different vehicle. A confrontation escalates, Jason Bass is attacked, and he passes away. The legal fight is long. Emery turns down a plea deal and goes to trial. On October 10th, 1993, a jury finds him guilty of second-degree homicide. Formal sentencing has not happened yet, and he is allowed to remain free for the moment. That night, Emery and his wife leave notes, drive to Claiborne Pell Newport Bridge, and then vanish. Their car is found. Years later, a skull identified as his wife's is recovered from the water, but Adam is never found. In 2004, a court declares him legally dead, but sightings keep popping up. Florida, then Europe. Investigators say there is reason to think he survived and may have support abroad. The case sits at a strange intersection of courtroom finality and real-world uncertainty. If he is alive, he is one of the most notorious, outstanding names from a New England case file. A friendly 19-year-old leaves a party, takes the path he always takes, but never makes it home. Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, August 28, 1999. Jason McCullough says goodbye to friends after a late-night get-together and starts the short walk to his parents' place. He chooses the usual cut-through at Highfield Park, a paved path surrounded by homes and apartments. Locals hear a single shot, footsteps scatter, and Jason is found on the path about an hour later. There is no robbery, there is no clear motive, no grudge anyone can point to. Police interview hundreds of people, release multiple composite sketches of men seen in the area, and later pursue a woman who may have been a key witness. Tips arrive, then slow to a trickle. Over the years, a reward program highlights the case, the park is renamed in Jason's memory, and an annual walk against violence keeps his name in the news. Investigators believe there were people nearby that night who know exactly what happened. They also believe the right conversation could still break the case. Jason's story is the kind that sticks with a community. It also shows how silence can outlast a headline. 2 German travelers accept a ride in British Columbia and vanish from the road. Early October 1983, Andrea Scherpf and Bernd Gorik, visiting from Germany, are hitchhiking in British Columbia. A driver in an older pickup stops. Days later, the couple is found by Highway 97 near the Pine River. Their belongings are missing. Someone uses Andrea's traveler's checks to buy fuel at stations moving south through the province. Years pass before a strong lead surfaces. A local man, Andy Rose, is accused after a woman claims he confessed. He is convicted, appealed, and is convicted again, and then science steps in. DNA testing on clothing from the case does not match Rose. In a 3rd trial, he is acquitted after almost a decade behind bars. Another man, Vance Hill, is later discussed after statements from his ex-wife, but nothing definitive ties him to the crime. Hill passes away in 1985. This case is still the kind that makes hitchhikers keep looking over their shoulder. The stops where the checks were used trace a path that feels personal and taunting. Someone knew those roads well and stayed one town ahead of the law. First up, we have Ariel Castro, the Cleveland man whose sentence became one of the most infamous in modern American court history. For more than a decade, Castro kept 3 women trapped inside his home while their families, friends, and the public searched for answers. From the outside, the house looked like any other ordinary home on the street, which made the truth even more disturbing when it finally came out. When the women were rescued in 2013, the full horror of what had happened inside that house stunned the country. Castro later pleaded guilty to hundreds of charges, avoiding a trial, but not avoiding the consequences. The judge made sure there was no confusion about his future. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, plus another 1,000 years, making it clear that there was no legal path for him to ever leave prison alive. Martin Bryant was the man behind one of Australia's darkest modern tragedies. In 1996, Bryant carried out a devastating attack at Port Arthur in Tasmania, a historic tourist site where people had simply gone for a normal day out. By the time it was over, 35 people had lost their lives and many others had been injured, leaving the entire country shaken. The case changed Australia forever and became one of the major turning points that led to some of the strictest gun reforms in the nation's history. In court, Bryant pleaded guilty and the judge handed down 35 life sentences, making sure each lost life was recognized in the punishment. Reports also list his sentence as including more than 1,000 additional years, all without possibility of parole. He remains one of Australia's most notorious prisoners, and his sentence was designed to guarantee he would never return to society. James Holmes was the man responsible for the 2012 movie theater attack in Aurora, Colorado, a case that horrified people because of how ordinary ordinary the setting was. People had gone out to a midnight screening, expecting a fun night out, sitting in a dark theater with popcorn, friends, and families around them. Instead, the theater became the scene of absolute chaos. Holmes was eventually convicted and sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each person who lost their life that night. But the court did not stop there. He was also given an additional 3,318 years in prison for the many people he injured and endangered. The sentence was not just about keeping him locked away forever, it was also about making sure every victim, every survivor, and every person affected by that night was counted in the final judgment. Adnan Oktar was a Turkish cult leader and television preacher whose case sounds almost unreal when you first hear it. For years, he presented himself as a religious figure, author, and media personality, often appearing on television surrounded by followers while promoting a carefully crafted public image. But prosecutors argued that behind that image was something much darker, a powerful criminal organization built on control, fear, manipulation, and exploitation. His charges included leading a criminal gang, abuse, fraud, blackmail, and other serious crimes connected to his inner circle. The investigation involved a massive number of people, and the case became one of the most shocking legal stories in Turkey. After a retrial, he was sentenced to 8,658 years in prison. The number is almost impossible to process, but the scale of the sentence matched the scale of the allegations, with prosecutors describing years of harm hidden behind a polished public persona. Dudley Wayne Kaiser received a sentence that became one of the longest ever given for a single count. In Alabama, Kaiser was convicted after taking the lives of his wife, his mother-in-law, and a college student who was also present during the crime. The details of the case were so severe that the court did not treat the punishment as one single act with one single sentence. Instead, the judge separated the victims and made sure the punishment reflected the full weight of what had happened. Kaiser received 2 life sentences for 2 of the victims, but for the killing of his wife, the judge handed down a separate sentence of 10,000 years. That number was obviously not meant to be realistic in a human sense, it was meant to be final. It was the justice system's way of saying that even one lifetime in prison did not feel like enough for what he had done. Darren Ben Alford Anderson's case is remembered for one of the worst appeal outcomes imaginable. Anderson was convicted in Oklahoma for a brutal set of crimes involving an elderly woman, including kidnapping, robbery, and SA. His original sentence was already almost impossible to comprehend, 2,200 years in prison. For most people, that would have been the end of the story, because no human being could ever outlive that amount of time. But Anderson appealed the conviction and was granted a new trial. At first, that might sound like a legal victory. Instead, the second trial also ended in conviction, and the new sentence became dramatically worse. This time, he was sentenced to 11,250 years in prison. Guinness later listed it as the greatest amount of jail time added as a result of an appeal, turning his attempt to reduce his punishment into the exact opposite. So that's something nice.
Joanna Dennehy is one of the most notorious female criminals in the UK. In March of 2013, 3 bodies were discovered in ditches outside Peterborough. In addition, 2 injured men were found in Hereford, but they survived. At first, investigators thought the attacker was a man, but turned out the perpetrator was a woman named Joanna Dennehy. Dennehy, along with her partner in crime, Gary Stretch, had a chilling plan to take the lives of 9 men, later claiming that they were doing it purely for entertainment. Dennehy would make it very well known, once she was apprehended, that she found killing to be oddly satisfying and felt an uncontrollable urge to continue after her first experience. In November of 2013, Dennehy pleaded guilty to her crimes and was sent to HM Prison Bronzefield. During her trial, she showed little to no remorse, even laughing at times during proceedings. She was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 19 years. Scott Lee Kimball is a convicted serial serial killer and fraudster from Boulder County, Colorado. Over a 2-year period, he killed at least 4 people, and investigators suspect him in up to 21 other unsolved cases. Kimball's criminal activities began when he was working as an informant for the FBI, which paid him and offered protection for his own legal troubles. Most of the info he provided the FBI turned out to be useless and false as well. Now, while running a legitimate business selling organic beef, Kimball was doing his fraudulent schemes behind the scenes. He forged documents, passed bad checks, which led to criminal charges in 4 western states by 2003. His fraudster skills aided in his truly evil crimes, though, allowing him to create false evidence that his victims were still alive after he'd taken their lives. He even used their credit cards and bank accounts to continue his fraudulent activities after killing them. 2 of his victims were people he knew personally, the daughter of his 3rd wife and his own uncle. Some family members and investigators also believe that a 2004 car accident that severely injured his oldest son was actually an attempt to kill him for insurance money, but no charges have ever been filed for that incident. The investigation into a check fraud scheme in 2006 eventually led authorities to uncover his killings. Kimball ultimately pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 70 years for his crimes. This is Andre Barros, nicknamed Psycho. He killed 5 people in San Luis Valley area of southern Colorado in 2020. Barros was arrested and ultimately pled guilty to 5 counts of first-degree killing and 5 counts of tampering with deceased human bodies. He was also slapped with kidnapping charges. After taking the lives of his victims, he would dispose of them near the New Mexico border, dismembering and burning their remains in pits. In May of 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison, ensuring he will never be released. His brutal actions and the way he handled his victims make him just a prime example of a prisoner who should never be set free. Joseph James D'Angelo is known by a lot of names: the Creek Bed Killer, the original Night Stalker, the Diamond Knot Killer, and more. And luckily, he's exactly where he belongs: prison. He's a former police officer responsible for a series of horrifying crimes in California between 1974 and 1986. Born on November 8, 1945 in Bath, New York, he terrorized communities with burglaries, SA, and killings. D'Angelo would often break into homes, tying up and frightening his victims before tormenting and killing them. For decades, his crimes went completely unsolved, but in 2018, he was arrested thanks to DNA evidence that linked him to one of his crimes. In June of 2020, he pleaded guilty to numerous charges, and on August 21st, 2020, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Eric Rudolph is a notorious criminal known for a series of bombings across the United States, including the 1996 Centennial Olympic Park attack in Atlanta, Georgia. Born on September 19, 1967 in Merritt Island, Florida, Rudolph took the lives of 2 people and injured over 100 others in this attack. His explosives targeted not only the Olympic event, but also abortion clinics and a gay nightclub. Rudolph became a fugitive after the attacks, evading capture for more than 5 years. He lived in the wilderness of North Carolina, managing to stay hidden while law enforcement searched for him. In 2003, though, he was finally arrested after being discovered rummaging through a trash bin. In 2005, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. If you ask anyone in law enforcement who the most powerful figure in Russian organized crime is, they'll probably mention Semyon Mogilevich. He was born in Kiev in 1946 and was still part of the Soviet Union, and over the years, he put together a criminal network that spread across Europe and North America. Money laundering, weapons trafficking, extortion, everything under the sun, operating in dozens of countries. One of the few times American authorities actually managed to charge him was through a company called YBM Magnex. In the 90s, this company claimed it was making industrial magnets, but it was a front. The FBI said investors were fed false financial records while the company's stock price was being artificially pumped up. And the whole thing fell apart in 1998. Investors had lost over $150 million. By 2003, the US government had charged Mogilevich with dozens of counts, including fraud and money laundering. A few years after that, he landed on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. But the thing that drives investigators crazy is that Mogilevich had spent most of his time living comfortably in Russia. Getting him extradited to the United States is basically not going to happen. So, the man who's widely considered the top boss of Russian organized crime, has never once sat in an American courtroom. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the criminal world in Russia got extremely violent, and during that period, one name stood out above almost everyone else: Vyacheslav Ivankov. His nickname was Yaponchik, which roughly translates to Little Japanese, which sounds pretty silly, but there was nothing funny about this guy. Ivankov climbed through the ranks of the Russian underworld in the 80s and eventually earned the title of Thief-in-Law, a rank inside Russian organized crime reserved for the baddest of the bad. In the early 90s, Ivankov moved to the United States and set up in Brighton Beach, New York. American investigators believed he'd been sent there specifically to coordinate criminal activity across the country. He was accused of running an extortion operation that went after Russian business owners. In 1995, the FBI took him down. Prosecutors said he and his crew had demanded millions of dollars from a financial firm and threatened violence if it wasn't paid. He was convicted, spent nearly a decade locked up in the US, then got deported back to Russia. In 2009, he was sitting outside a restaurant in Moscow when he was sniped from across the street. He died a few weeks later. Gennady Petrov. Investigators say he helped build one of the most powerful criminal networks to come out of St. Petersburg in the 90s. Petrov is strongly tied to the Tambov crime group, which grew during the messy years right after the Soviet Union fell apart. At that time, entire industries were being sold off and enormous amounts of money were changing hands, and criminals were right there, mixing legitimate business deals with not so legitimate ones. Petrov is involved in money laundering, racketeering, narcotics trafficking, and arms smuggling. Spanish investigators spent years tracking him and eventually launched an operation in 2008. Petrov was arrested during that operation along with a bunch of his crew, but things were muddy. The criminal activity overlapped with what looked like totally normal business, but it was all being used to hide where the money was really coming from. But Petrov denied all of it and was later let out on bail. In 2010, a crime happened in Russia that genuinely shocked the entire country. Sergei Sapok was the leader of a violent crew operating in a small rural area in southern Russia. For years, people in that area had, quietly whispered about what was going on. Businesses being controlled, people being intimidated. It had been going on for a long time. But on November 4th, 2010, everything came to a head. That night, members of Sapok's crew broke into the home of a local farmer named Sergei Amatov. What happened inside was one of the most brutal mass killings in modern Russian history. 12 people were killed. The attackers tried to burn parts of the house down to get rid of the evidence. As investigators dug into the case, a much bigger picture started forming. People in the area had been reporting threats and violence for years, but police had basically looked the other way. Finally, Sapok and several of his crew were arrested and brought to trial. In 2013, he was sentenced to life in prison. 2 years later, in 2014, he died of a stroke in prison just after 3 of his accomplices took their own lives. Few people in Russian history caused as much fear as Andrei Chikatilo. He was a serial killer, and his crimes spread terror through parts of the Soviet Union for more than a decade. Chikatilo was born in Ukraine in 1936, spent most of his life working as a teacher and a factory worker. From the outside, he looked completely ordinary, but between 1978 and 1990, he carried out a string of horrifying attacks targeting women and young people, many of them runaways or just traveling alone near train stations. He would approach them with offers of food or money. He would get them somewhere isolated and then attack them in wooded areas nearby. Investigators eventually connected him to at least 52 unalivings, so this guy was one of the most prolific serial killers in modern history. Finally, in 1990, police caught him during a surveillance operation near a train station. After his arrest, he confessed to dozens of the crimes. He was tried in 1992, convicted, and executed in 1994. In the late 80s and into the early 90s, Sergei Maduev became one of the most feared criminals in Russia. Born in 1956, he built a reputation not just as someone who committed violent crimes, but as someone who was calculated and methodical about it. He carried out violent robberies and unalivings across multiple cities. Investigators suspected him in the deaths of at least 10 people, the real number probably being much higher. One of the stories that made him particularly notorious involves a female investigator who was assigned to question him in prison. He reportedly manipulated and seduced her, and authorities believed it was part of a calculated plan to escape. So this guy wasn't just brutal, he was Smart, not a good combination. It made him especially hard to deal with. But he was convicted and sentenced to death, but he ended up dying in prison in 2006 after years of being locked up. Aslan Usoyan went by the nickname Grandpa Hassan. This man was considered one of the most powerful and feared figures in Russia for decades. Born in 1937 in Georgia, he built up an operation across Europe. He wasn't the type who got his hands dirty personally though. He was a strategist who would pull the strings from a distance. He also had his hands in businesses that looked completely legit, which made it almost impossible to tie anything back to him. But in 2013, he met the same fate a lot of Russia's top criminals do, violently. He was hit at a restaurant in Moscow right in the middle of the day. This next one happened in 2008. Nikolai Ogolyobak used to be a choir boy, but somewhere along the way, he got drawn into Satanism and ended up leading a small cult. He and a few followers targeted teenagers in the local goth scene. He lured 4 of them into the woods about 300 miles northeast of Moscow. There, they forced the teens to drink before committing horrific acts against them. Police discovered the cult when body parts were found in Nikolai's apartment. He was arrested and received a measly 20-year sentence, which he didn't even have to complete. He was set free a few years ago after serving 6 months of military service in Ukraine. Sergei Timofeyev ran one of the most feared criminal organizations in Moscow during the 90s. This group came up during the years right after the Soviet Union fell apart. At the time, there was a power vacuum in both business and crime, and people like Timofeyev moved in to fill it. The organization was involved in extortion, protection rackets, violent robberies, and money laundering. But they weren't just street-level criminals running small operations. They controlled entire districts of Moscow. Anyone who refused to go along with them or got in their way often paid for it with their life. But Timofeyev himself became a major target during the criminal wars that were going on throughout Moscow at the time. Some pretty high-profile criminals were being taken out on a regular basis, often in public, in order to send a message. Well, in 1994, Timofeyev was killed with an explosive was planted in his car. Alexander Litvinenko was a former officer in Russia's FSB, agency that came right after the KGB. He eventually defected to the United Kingdom and became one of the most outspoken critics of the Russian government. In the early 2000s, he started publicly accusing Russian intelligence and criminal networks of corruption and carrying out political hits, and that made him some very serious enemies. He was living in London under tight security, but it wasn't enough to keep him safe. In 2006, Litvinenko was poisoned with polonium-210, which is a radioactive substance that most people had never heard of at the time. It's rare to ever see, but man, was it a brutal way to go out. He died very slowly and painfully over the course of several weeks. And that has been the video for today. I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next one.
Have you ever received a letter that chilled you to the bone? Let's start with the infamous Zodiac Killer who terrorized Northern California in the late 1960s and early 70s. This elusive criminal sent bizarre, cryptic letters to local newspapers daring the police to catch him. In his taunting messages, he boasted of his crimes and even included complex ciphers, some of which remain unsolved to this day. The Zodiac claimed responsibility for several brutal crimes, targeting young couples and lone individuals, yet his true identity has never been confirmed. Despite countless investigations, new evidence, and modern forensic techniques, the Zodiac Killer continues to be one of America's most notorious unsolved mysteries. His callous mix of bravado and calculated cruelty has kept both law enforcement and armchair detectives busy for decades, leaving behind more questions than answers. What if you were wandering the foggy streets of Victorian London and a shadow lurked around every corner? Imagine the terror of 1888 in the Whitechapel district where Jack the Ripper prowled the night. This unidentified killer's brutal attacks on female sex workers, marked by grisly mutilations, sent shockwaves throughout London and the world. Despite numerous suspects and theories over the years, from local butchers to aristocrats, the true identity of Jack Jack the Ripper remains hidden in the annals of history. His reign of terror was characterized not just by the violence of his crimes, but by the mystery that enveloped every unsolved crime. The Ripper's ability to vanish into the labyrinthine streets of Victorian London, evading capture and igniting a media frenzy, has cemented his place as perhaps the most infamous unsolved case of all time. More than a century later, his legend continues to captivate and horrify. Have you ever heard of a killer who broke into homes and even sent eerie notes to the press? The Axeman of New Orleans haunted the streets between 1918 and 1919, leaving a trail of terror that sends shivers down spines today. Unlike most killers who strike in secrecy, this killer was known for his bizarre communication, penning letters that hinted at his next move and even suggested a taste for jazz music. Victims, chosen at random, were attacked in their own homes with an axe, and the brutality of these crimes left the community in a state of panic. The Axeman's unpredictable methods and mysterious motivations sparked a wave of rumors and superstitions, with some locals even believing he was a demon or spirit sent to punish the city. Despite a massive manhunt and intense public scrutiny, the Axeman vanished without a trace, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions and a city forever changed by fear. Can you imagine a killer so gruesome that his crimes left a city paralyzed with fear? In the 1930s, Cleveland, Ohio was terrorized by the Cleveland Torso Killer, often referred to as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. This unidentified killer was notorious for dismembering his victims in a series of shocking and macabre crimes. The brutality of the attacks, which involved the systemic butchering of bodies, left both the community and law enforcement reeling. Despite extensive investigations, no one was ever charged with these horrific crimes, and the killer's identity remains one of the most baffling mysteries in American criminal history. The sheer savagery of the crimes and the grisly manner in which they were carried out have led many to believe that this was not the act of a common criminal, but of someone with a deeply disturbed psyche. To this day, the case continues to intrigue and horrify, a grim reminder of how evil can lurk in even the most unsuspecting places. What secrets could be hiding beneath the serene shores of Long Island? Moving to the East Coast, the case of the Gilgo Beach Killer, also known as the Long Island serial killer, remains one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in modern American history. Between the late 1990s and the early 2010s, the discovery of several victims' remains along remote beaches and highways in Long Island sent shockwaves through the community. The victims, many of whom were vulnerable sex workers, were found in various states of decomposition, suggesting a serial killer operating with chilling precision. Despite years of investigations, advanced forensic analysis, and numerous tips from the public, law enforcement has been unable to definitively link the crimes to a single suspect. The case not only highlights the tragic exploitation of society's most marginalized individuals, but also the profound challenges that arise when a killer manages to slip through every net cast by the authorities. The mystery of the Long Island serial killer continues to haunt the region, a dark stain on an otherwise picturesque landscape. Ever stumble upon a modern mystery that makes you question everything you thought you knew about safety in a big city? In Albuquerque, New Mexico, the grim case of the West Mesa Bone Collector has puzzled investigators and terrified residents. Around 2009, the remains of 11 women were discovered buried in the desolate expanses of Albuquerque's West Mesa. These were not the results of a single tragic accident or natural causes, but the work of a killer whose identity remains unknown. The case shocked the local community not only because of the sheer number of victims, but also due to the cold, methodical way in which they were disposed of. Despite intensive investigations, numerous leads, and even modern DNA analysis, the person responsible for these heinous crimes has never been brought to justice. The West Mesa Bone Collector case stands as a reminder that even in our modern, supposedly safe urban environments, darkness can hide in the most unexpected places.
Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, aka P. Diddy. Celebrities just keep getting more and more disturbed by the day, don't they? This Sean Combs case is nuts. Diddy's never been a stranger to controversy, but these allegations dating back to the early 90s are just a whole other beast. First in 2017, a former personal chef of his named Cindy Rula made allegations of essay against him. Then Casey Ventura came out saying he was involved in human trafficking and essay. More and more things started coming out, all of it incredibly twisted. He'd apparently throw these big parties which some of his other rich and famous friends would attend and lure women to, and bad stuff would happen. Combs' home was then raided back in March, and a bunch of his electronics were seized, and on September 16th he was arrested and is being charged with trafficking and racketeering. He's also been denied bail as Judge Andrew L. Carter Jr. is concerned about witnesses being threatened or intimidated. With the mountain of evidence and people making allegations against him, it is not looking good for Puff. Rebecca Butterfield is known as one of Australia's most dangerous female prisoners. She first landed herself in prison in 1996. She was convicted of crimes related to illicit substances, breaking and entering, and property damage, but she didn't do a lot of time and was released, but things would just get far worse in the years to come. In 2000, she attacked her neighbor who was trying to prevent Butterfield from harming herself, leading to a charge of grievous bodily harm. This resulted in a 3-year sentence, but while at Silverwater Women's Prison, she committed an even more serious crime. Butterfield attacked a fellow inmate, Bruce Lim Wars, brutally slashing at her with a blade and killing her. This earned her an additional 12 years behind bars, and later authorities deemed her too dangerous for society, adding another 5 years to her sentence. Butterfield has made it very clear that if she were ever released, she would kill again. In January of 2021, she appeared at the Supreme Court to seek her release, but her request was thankfully denied. Next we have Robert Maudsley, aka the Brain Eater, an English prisoner born in 1953 who's so dangerous he's been locked in solitary confinement since 1983. And with a nickname like Brain Eater, that's not all that surprising. In 1974, Maudsley met a man named John Farrell who ended up showing Maudsley pictures of young people he had harmed. Maudsley ended up killing the depraved man, which of course landed him in court. He ended up being sent to a psychiatric hospital where he locked himself in a cell with a man named David Francis, tormenting him for several hours before finally taking his life. In all fairness, David Francis was also a complete scumbag whose crimes were along the same lines as Maudsley's first victim, John Farrell. For this crime, he was sent to Wakefield Prison, where he would end up killing 2 prisoners on the same day in 1978. His original goal had been 7. Again, all these guys were pretty terrible people. Then a special 2-cell unit was built in the basement of Wakefield where Maudsley has been kept ever since. He's only ever let out on occasion, and when he is, he's accompanied by several heavily armed officers. As for where he gets the Brain Eater nickname, he was rumored to have eaten part of the brain of one of his victims, although that very well may be an urban legend. Richard McNair may be one of the most dangerous and clever criminals in American history. It all started in 1987 with a botched robbery in Minnow, North Dakota. While attempting to steal from a home, McNair encountered 2 men. In the chaos, he fired at them. One man was severely injured, the other died. He was pulled in for questioning in February of 1988 and ended up confessing, but he managed to escape from the police station where he was being held. He was caught after a couple hours and handcuffed to a chair, but that didn't stop him. Using a lip balm, McNair slipped out of his handcuffs and fled for a second time, leading officers on a foot chase. He was recaptured shortly after and ended up receiving 2 life sentences for his crimes. Then in 1992, he made another escape from the North Dakota State Penitentiary with 2 other inmates. Again, he was caught just hours later, but his most infamous escape happened in 2006 while he was at a federal penitentiary in Louisiana. He managed to pack himself up and get mailed out of the prison. An officer ran into him just a few blocks away, but McNair managed to convince this guy that he was just a friendly jocker. And for 10 whole months, he was free, using stolen identities and even making his way to Canada. But in 2007, he was finally apprehended again. Will Richard McNair ever be let out of prison? I don't know, but it sounds like it's really just up to him whenever he feels like escaping again. Charles Cullen, often referred to as the Angel of Death, is perhaps the most prolific serial killer in American history. Will he ever be set free? Well, not until 2403 at the very earliest, so no. Born on February 22nd, 1960 in West Orange, New Jersey, Cullen grew up to become a nurse and found work at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. And this is where the nightmare began. Cullen's first confessed kill took place on June 11th, 1988, when he gave a patient a lethal overdose of intravenous medication. By the time he left St. Barnabas in 1992, Cullen claimed to have taken the lives of numerous patients. Just a month after leaving, he started a new job at Warren Hospital in Phillipsburg, where he continued this spree, taking the lives of 3 elderly women with overdoses of a heart medication, and he didn't stop there. At Hunterton Medical Center in Flemington, Cullen caused the deaths of at least 5 more patients using the same medication. Wherever he worked, death followed him. Somehow his actions went unnoticed for years until he was arrested on December 12th of 2003. He'd only been implicated in 2 cases, but once in custody, Cullen revealed the truly staggering number of victims he was actually responsible for, claiming to have killed about 400 people. And his explanation? Well, he claimed he was helping his patients escape their pain. On the evening of August 17, 1993, a police officer in Salem, Oregon responded to a wellness call after an elderly couple, Richard and Grace Remy, hadn't answered their door. The officer entered the home to find both Richard and Grace dead. Shortly after, 2 young twins named Liddell and Lacelle White were arrested. Living nearby, they had a history of criminal behavior that included harassment, burglary, and SA. First, they were sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, but because of their young age, the punishment was later deemed cruel and unusual, and they can apply for parole as early as 2048. On May 22nd of 1998, a man named Jack Wilson returned to his home in Huntsville, Alabama to find an intruder waiting for him. The intruder brutally attacked him with a baseball bat before jabbing him with a blade. A week later, a carpenter named James White was arrested and charged in connection with Jack's death. Shortly after, both Jack's wife, Betty Wilson, and her twin sister, Peggy Lowe, were also arrested. As the investigation unfolded, the attacker, James White, confessed that he was having an affair with Peggy, who was already married. Although Peggy didn't want anything to happen to her husband, she did tell James that her sister Betty was married to Jack Wilson and had apparently wanted something bad to happen to him so that he'd be out of the way. According to White, he was hired to handle the problem that was Jack, and claimed he was promised $2,500 up front and an additional $2,500 after the act was carried out. Both Betty and White were convicted and received life sentences. Peggy maintained her innocence, though, and argued that White was mentally unstable and that she hadn't even been having an affair with him. The Spahalski twins just could not stay out of trouble to save their lives. There's almost nothing these two didn't do. Stephen and Robert Spahalski grew up doing crimes together. By the time they were 18, they were doing armed robberies. One of these robberies went wrong, and Stephen ended up killing the store owner. He was sentenced to life in prison. But Robert's life didn't get any better now that he didn't have his partner in crime. In fact, it got way worse. He got into several illicit substances and started working in what's referred to as the oldest profession. Google that if you need to. Starting in 1973, he'd be in and out of prison for all sorts of things. And then starting in 1990, things got really bad. He killed a woman named Maureen Armstrong, a fellow worker of the night. A few months after that, he strangled his girlfriend. Then in 1991, he took the life of one of his male clients. It wasn't until 2005 that he'd kill again, though, when he beat his girlfriend's neighbor to death after hallucinating that she'd turned into a demon. Obviously, he was not sober at the time. After sobering up, though, he turned himself in, also confessing to the other killings years before. He received a 100-year prison sentence. The Carr brothers, Reginald and Jonathan, were responsible for a horrific crime spree in Wichita, Kansas in December of 2000. Over 6 days, they committed a series of violent acts that shocked the community. It all began on December 8th when they robbed a 23-year-old assistant baseball coach. This was just the start of the rampage, though. 3 days later, on December 11th, the brothers escalated their crimes by fatally wounding a 55-year-old cellist during a carjacking. Their most disturbing act occurred on December 14th, though, when they broke into a home where 5 young adults were had gathered. After robbing the house of valuables, they subjected the victims to horrific torment. The brothers forced them to withdraw money from ATMs, draining their bank accounts, and after that, they took the lives of the 5 victims at a secluded soccer complex on the outskirts of Wichita. Amazingly though, one of these victims, Holly G., managed to survive and later identified the brothers. The cars had fired at the back of their victims' heads, but a plastic hair clip Holly had been wearing deflected the bullet, and she survived. The Carr brothers were caught and are now on death row at the El Dorado Correctional Facility. In 2008, an argument between 2 brothers over inheritance money turned deadly. 50-year-old David P. Hett was found dead in his home in South Carolina by his friend. He'd received blunt force trauma to the head. He also had several defensive wounds on his arms and hands. Turned out his attacker had been his very own brother, Paul Richard Hett. Turned out they'd gotten into a heated argument over inheritance money, which quickly turned violent. Their mother had just died, leaving Paul with pretty much all her assets, and David just received $1. Ouch, I can see why an argument may have started there.
This list, in our number 10 spot, we have the Munich Santa Claus bank robbery of 2012. A burst of violence draped in candy cane stripes and carols can stop a holiday shopper in their tracks, and that's exactly what happened in Munich on a crisp December morning in 2012. Under that familiar jolly red suit and bushy white beard lurked a hardened criminal, clutching a weapon and eyeing a bag of cash. Without blinking, he brazenly threatened bank clerks as they tried to make sense of Santa's sudden shift from giver to taker. Moments later, with crowds still cheerfully unaware of the drama unfolding behind closed doors, he strolled out onto the streets, blending seamlessly into the holiday chaos. Just another red-coated figure in a sea of festive cheer. The police were left scrambling, the city rattled, and the image of Saint Nick, at least for those involved, would never look the same again. Next, we are talking about Frau Perchta. This legend comes from Germany and Austria, and the legend of Frau Perchta is a terrifying one. Also known as the belly slitter, this evil Christmas creature takes the lives of her targets by opening up their stomachs and stuffing them with straw and stones. She also likes to eat people, just to top it all off. You might be wondering who her victims are, and those would be people with dirty homes, those who worked during the 12 days of Christmas, or, of course the worst, those with bad behavior that's awful enough to land them on the naughty list. But it is said that her absolute least favorite kind of person is someone who is lazy. All in all, it's safe to say you better not get on Frau Perchta's bad side, or else instead of delicious food, you'll find your belly full of straw and stones. Or worse, you'll find yourself inside the belly of the beast herself. Next, we are talking about the Colombian hitman disguised as Santa. In 2013, a chilling tale unfolded in Bogota, Colombia, when a hitman decided that Christmas was the perfect time to deliver a deadly blow. Dressed as Santa Claus, he blended effortlessly into the holiday crowd, using the festive spirit as cover for his sinister mission. The target? El Mono, a high-profile criminal who was unaware that his jolly-looking assailant was anything but cheerful. As the assassin walked through the busy streets, no one suspected a thing, and within moments he made his move, claiming the life of his target before vanishing into the city's celebration. With a red suit and white beard hiding his true intentions, he capitalized on the chaos of the season to escape, leaving behind only the horror of a Christmas assassination. This bizarre and eerie twist on the Santa myth just goes to show that when the spirit of Christmas is hijacked by true evil, even bright red costumes can't hide a dark heart. Next up, we are talking about Belsnickel. Belsnickel is a monster that comes from German folklore. He appears in raggedy old clothing and fur, and he carries a switch with him. The strange thing about Belsnickel is that he also carries candy to reward the good children, which, I mean, may be good for him putting in a bit of effort to not be entirely evil, but I'm not sure if giving out candy as a reward really makes up for the fact that he uses the switch to beat the ones who are being bad. I think it might just be best to just stick with classic Santa's lump of coal for those who are poorly behaved, but maybe that's just my opinion.
Thomas Silverstein isn't just some criminal who ended up in a tough prison, he's one of the main reasons the whole Supermax system exists. Back in 1983, he took the life of a corrections officer using a weapon he'd somehow managed to hide, even while already being in a high-security facility. After that, the federal government decided that he couldn't be treated like any other prisoner, so he was given zero human contact. That lasted for 30 years. The FBI and the Bureau of Prisons built what you could only describe as a prison inside a prison specifically for him. For years, he sat in a basement cell in Atlanta before they eventually moved him out to Colorado. His cell was roughly the size of a king-sized bed. The lights always stayed on 24 hours a day because they didn't want any chance of him using darkness to get the jump on a guard. He couldn't talk to other inmates. The only way he interacted with staff was through a steel mesh screen. And when he died in 2019, he turned into something of a legend inside the system, not just because of what he did, because the government had managed to keep him in complete isolation for longer than a lot of people have been alive. If you look into the history of the 1993 World Trade Center incident, you'll find Ramzi Youssef. He was a trained engineer who used everything he knew to build a massive explosive, load it into a rented van, and carry out one of the biggest attacks on American soil at the time. After it happened, he ran. The FBI spent years chasing him across multiple countries before they finally caught him in Pakistan. Once they got him back to the US, it became clear pretty quickly that a regular prison just wasn't gonna cut it. He's now in the most isolated part of ADX Florence, a section called Range 13. He's been placed under something called Special Administrative Measures, which basically means the government treats everything he says or writes like weapons. He has no media contact. Every single piece of mail goes through intelligence officers who are looking for anything suspicious. They're genuinely worried that even a regular-looking letter could have coded instructions buried in it for someone on the outside. His cell has a window, but it's angled in a way that you can only see the sky, not the ground. You can't see any other fences, it's just the sky. They've completely cut him off from the outside world. Michael Swango might be the most unsettling person on this list, and a big reason for that is how trusted he was. He was a doctor, worked at well-known hospitals, had a very good career, but everywhere he went, people around him started dying. He had a serious obsession with poisons and would give his coworkers and patients things that would make them violently ill or worse. The FBI eventually caught up with him after he tried to escape to Africa to keep practicing medicine there. Because of how completely he betrayed everyone's trust, being that he was a doctor, he ended up at the Supermax. He's not in the ultra-isolated wing like some of the others. He's in what you'd call the general Supermax population, which still means a concrete room with a sink and toilet built just right into the wall. There's not much information that comes out about his daily life because there's just not a lot to talk about. It's a miserable existence, one that he very much deserves. For more than 20 years, Robert Hansen pulled off something that sounds completely made up. I mean, this is real movie territory stuff here. See, during the day, he was a senior FBI agent. His job was to catch foreign spies, but at night, he was working with them. He handed over thousands of pages of classified information to Russian intelligence in exchange for diamonds and cash. Because of what he gave them, several American spies working overseas were found out. Some were unalived. When the FBI finally found out Hansen was the mole that they'd been looking for, they threw him straight to ADX Florence, into a cell where the chances of him passing along anything he still knew were basically zero. For years, he was one of the most quietly hidden prisoners in the entire country. He knew things about American security that couldn't be allowed to get out, so the government made sure he lived in total isolation. He wasn't allowed to have visitors other than his immediate family, and even those were monitored. He died in his cell in 2023. That's one of those cases where I'm like, surprised they didn't just kill him. Not that I'm saying they should have, but it's like, I don't know. I feel like, why not? Anyway, Larry Hoover, still a major name in Chicago. Even now, he built one of the largest criminal organizations in the country. At its height, we're talking tens of thousands of members and millions of dollars flowing through. But even after he went to state prison, the FBI figured out he hadn't stopped running things. He was using visitors to pass along messages and was basically holding meetings inside the visitation room. The federal government eventually stepped in and had him moved to the Supermax to cut all that tomfoolery off. And since then, his ability to communicate has been almost completely shut down. His legal team has spent years fighting to get him moved somewhere else, arguing that the level of isolation he's kept in is cruel and unusual, but the government worries that with the amount of power and influence that he has, if he were allowed to communicate freely, it would immediately have an effect on crime in the street, so he's kind of become a ghost. The Aryan Brotherhood is one of the most violent groups operating within the prison system. Tyler Bingham was one of the people running it. In the early 2000s, the FBI launched a massive racketeering case against him, exposing how he used coded messages, sometimes written in invisible ink made from citrus juice, to order hits on other inmates across the country. So clearly, regular prison wasn't enough. He got moved to the Supermax. He now lives in what's called a control unit, which is a part of the prison designed for people who can't be trusted around even other inmates. Everything he touches gets checked, and everything he writes gets read by people looking for hidden messages specifically. So he now spends 23 hours a day in a single room. Zacharias Musui is usually described as the person who would have been the 20th hijacker on September 11th. He wasn't on any of the planes that day, but he was involved in the planning and was in flight training at the time. His trial was pretty chaotic. He shouted during court proceedings, tried to get rid of his own lawyers, but once the sentencing happened and the cameras left, he completely disappeared into the federal system. He's held at ADX Florence under some of the most extreme communications restrictions in the country. He has no contact with the general prison population. The government is so concerned about his potential to inspire people that they've cut off almost every avenue that he'd use to spread any kind of message. Unlike some of the bigger names on this list, who at least got, a news mention every few years, this guy has been almost entirely wiped from public view. Eric Rudolph was genuinely hard to catch. After the 1996 Olympic Park attack, he ran into the mountains of North Carolina and survived out there for 5 years. He knew how to live off the land, how to stay hidden, how to steal what he needed without being seen. To some extremist groups, that made him look like some kind of folk hero. When the FBI finally found him, though, he was digging through trash behind a grocery store. And they knew exactly where he had to go. The Supermax. It's basically the opposite of everything that he thrived in. Instead of the open air of the Appalachians, he's surrounded by 4 concrete walls. And the FBI watches everything he sends out, because in the past, he tried to write essays that justified his actions and stuff like that. They see him as someone who could push others toward extremism, so they use the prison's communication rules as a way to make sure his voice does not reach anybody. El Chapo, he needs no introduction. For a long time, he was the most wanted person on the planet. He became famous for getting out of 2 high-security Mexican prisons, once in a laundry cart, once through a tunnel that was over a mile long and had a motorcycle track built into it. When the US finally got him extradited, both the FBI and the DEA were determined to make sure that he was never a free man again. He's now in ADX Florence, and the life he's living now is about as far from his old world as you can get. It's a small cell, single narrow window slit, no exercising with other inmates. His outdoor time happens in a small cage that lets in a little bit of fresh air, but nothing else. His lawyers have filed complaint after complaint saying the isolation is breaking him down physically and mentally, but first of all, I think that's the whole point, but anything less than total lockdown would just allow him to keep running his operation from the inside. Plus, he's just far too crafty. It was a huge operation, but here's what made him different from pretty much everyone else on this list. While all that was happening, he was also working as a top-level FBI informant. The feds weren't just aware of him, they were actively covering him while he took out his competition. Some of the agents who were supposed to be stopping people like him were basically running protection for him instead. When all of that came out, Bulger ran. He stayed off the grid for 16 years and climbed all the way to the top of the most wanted list. They finally found him in an apartment in Santa Monica, California. That's when the government's real headache started, because Bulger knew everything. He knew which agents had helped him. He knew which cases had been buried. He knew where actual bodies were hidden and who put them there. Having him sit in a courtroom or a prison cell where he could start talking, that was a nightmare scenario for a lot of people still inside the system. So he got moved around constantly. Every day he was alive was another day someone powerful was nervous. It all ended in 2018. He got transferred to a facility in West Virginia, and within hours of arriving, he was whacked by other inmates. And it's pretty obvious why. See, that's how I figure that these government types would deal with something like that, you know? The Menendez brothers case is one of the most infamous crime cases of the 90s, and it's easy to see why. It's incredibly shocking and disturbing. It was receiving all this media attention at the time as one of the most notorious trials of the decade. Then the O.J. Simpson case came around and the Menendez brothers kind of faded out of the public eye. For those who are unfamiliar though, Lyle and Eric Menendez had a pretty privileged upbringing in Beverly Hills, but then they killed their parents. Of course, they denied this, saying that armed robbers were responsible, but authorities soon started getting suspicious of them after they started noticing all the fancy stuff the brothers were buying with their inheritance money they received from their late parents, which was quite sizable. Eventually, they confessed to having killed their parents, saying they'd wanted to escape their father's overly controlling behavior and high standards. In court, the defense argued that the brothers had suffered horrible mistreatment at the hands of their parents. The prosecution argued that this was pure fabrication and that they'd taken their parents' lives in order to receive their father's multi-million-dollar estate. It took 2 trials before the brothers were finally put to justice, receiving life imprisonment for their crimes. What you're seeing here is an interview with the Kray twins, 2 of England's most notorious criminals. You know, you're famous when Tom Hardy plays you in a biopic. But yeah, this is an actual interview with the gangsters just 2 years before they were incarcerated. Ronnie and Reggie Kray were notorious gangsters in London during the 50s and 60s. They ran a violent group known as The Firm, which operated in the East End of London. At the time, they were also successful nightclub owners, hosting celebrities like Judy Garland and Frank Sinatra. The Krays earned the nickname Britain's Godfathers, being involved in various criminal activities including extortion, armed robbery, arson, hijacking, you name it. They were known for their brutal tactics and worked together seamlessly, almost like they could read each other's minds during fights. In 1968, police finally arrested them for the killings of Jack the Hat McVitie and George Cornell. After their conviction, both brothers were sent to prison. Ronnie died from a heart attack in 1995, while Reggie passed away from cancer in 2000. In the early hours of June 30th, 2014 in Fresno, California, twin brothers Gerald and Jared Smith approached a 35-year-old woman. After asking her for money, she said she didn't have any, so they began ruthlessly attacking her. Then a 49-year-old homeless passerby named Nathan Halstead pulled over on his bike and tried to intervene. Instead of stopping, the twins just turned their aggression towards him. For several minutes, they attacked Halstead, leaving him unconscious on the ground. Then a driver approached the scene and attempted to help Halstead. In response, the Smith twins then targeted this driver as well, and amid all this chaos, a third vehicle came along, swerving to avoid Halstead's bike, but unfortunately ended up hitting Halstead, who was lying in the lane. The twins then fled the scene. The investigation led to the collection of fingerprints from a vehicle, which revealed that Gerald Smith had touched the hood during the altercation. Both twins were arrested shortly thereafter. They were convicted in 2019, but could potentially be released as early as 2026. On April 1st of 1990, the quiet town of South Dakota was shaken when an 85-year-old Walter Gibbs was found dead in his home. Now, at first it was thought he died of natural causes, but about a year later, authorities received a tip that turned the case on its head. Darlene Phillips, a 46-year-old woman serving time in prison, was reportedly bragging about having killed Gibbs, and this was not out of the realm of possibility. Darlene had a history with Gibbs. They'd been married and divorced twice, and just months before his death, she'd, tried to set his house on fire, so it wasn't like she was just bragging for the sake of it. Police would exhume Gibbs' body, and on closer inspection, it looked like he had been killed. But Darlene's then husband, Jerome Phillips, eventually confessed to the crime. He said that he smothered Gibbs with a pillow while Darlene held down his legs, all while Darlene's twin sister, Dolores Christensen, was hanging out in the next room, knowing full well what was going on. And why was she cool with it? Well, it turned out Dolores was the beneficiary of Gibbs' will. Both sisters had actually been married to Gibbs at one point or another and had divorced him more than once, which is really weird. Imagine divorcing someone and then marrying an identical version of them. I mean, wouldn't you just want something new? And then doing it like twice over, too. Very bizarre case. Anyway. On September 29th of 2001 in Penrose, Colorado, 24-year-old Joel Stovall was arrested for killing his neighbor's dog. Sheriff's Deputy Jason Schwartz responded to the call and placed Joel in the back of his police car. Joel's twin brother, Michael, was also arrested after making threats. Unfortunately, Michael had not been properly searched before being placed in the cruiser, and as they drove toward the police station, Michael freed himself with a pair of handcuff keys that he'd hidden in his pocket, pulled out a firearm, and shot at Deputy Schwartz. The twins fled to a nearby town where they had a rented trailer loaded with weapons and ammo. 2 police officers arrived at the trailer, and then the twins started opening fire on the officers. One officer was left paralyzed after the confrontation. The brothers then stole a truck and led police on this high-speed chase. They kept firing at the pursuing officers while throwing stuff out of the back of the truck to slow them down. Eventually, the Stovall brothers ran over road spikes and encountered a police roadblock, but that still wasn't enough to stop them. They managed to escape into the nearby mountains. A massive manhunt was launched, but one day later, the twins ended up turning themselves in. 1 police officer was dead now, 18 others were injured. They were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When you think about Rex Heuermann, it's almost impossible to imagine how someone who seemed so ordinary could have been hiding such a dark side. By day, Heuermann was just another businessman, a well-respected architect living in Long Island. He had a stable job, a family, and by all outward appearances, a very normal life. You wouldn't look at him and think, oh yeah, that guy's hiding something, but he was. The Long Island serial killer, the Manorville Butcher, the Craigslist Ripper. These were all names given to the unidentified assailant responsible for the Gilgo Beach serial killings. In 2010, police discovered a set of bodies along a stretch of Gilgo Beach. Over time, more bodies were found in the area, leading investigators to believe that a serial killer was at work. The victims were mostly women who worked as escorts and advertised on Craigslist, and their bodies were found in a similar manner, usually wrapped in burlap. The killings were thought to have taken place between 1996 and 2010, and for a long time the case was a complete mystery. That is, until very recently. In 2022, police started to investigate an architect named Rex Heuermann. His cell phone records showed that he'd had contact with 3 of the victims, and his internet history showed he'd been keeping track of the investigation incessantly, as well as looking up some very disturbing things online. Plus, his vehicle had been connected to one of the killings, and one of his hairs was found in one of the burlap sacks containing one of the bodies. On June 6th of 2024, Rex was charged with the killing of 6 women. He's also under investigation for the death of a woman named Valerie Mack in 2000. To the people around him, Richard Cottingham was just another average guy. He had a steady job, seemingly normal life, but his life was anything but normal, at least the part of it he was hiding. Cottingham is now known as the Torso Killer or the Times Square Ripper, and his crimes were just as brutal as they sound. He's currently serving multiple life sentences for his confirmed killings, but he later admitted to much more, telling a journalist in 2009 that he'd taken the lives of 80 to 100 women across the US. Cottingham had managed to keep this hidden from his family and friends for years. He was married with kids, and from the outside, he looked like he was living a standard suburban life. In 1967, Cottingham killed a woman named Nancy Vogel. 2 years later, he got married, and for the next 11 years, he continued his crimes without his family knowing. He was finally arrested in 1980 and has been in prison ever since. The story of the San Francisco witch killers is one of those cases that really makes you question how well you can ever truly know someone. The San Francisco witch killers were involved in a string of horrific killings. They were convicted for 3 killings between 1981 and 1983, which after the last guy doesn't sound like a lot, but that's still 3 people being killed. That's a big deal, no matter how you look at it. And what's incredibly disturbing is how a woman named Jen Carson had to deal with the revelation that her father, James Carson, and her stepmother, Suzanne Barnes, were the ones behind it. Jen Carson was young when she found out the truth about her father and stepmother. Her father and his wife weren't just petty criminals, they'd been responsible for brutal, heinous acts. This obviously had a profound impact on her mental and emotional well-being. In Jen Carson's very own words, "If my father could kill people, then I reasoned, anyone could be a killer. I can't imagine how it would feel learning of something like this. Like, how would you ever trust anyone again? You'd look at everyone you met, anyone who got too close, and just constantly be wondering, spending every day with this all-consuming fear that the people around you may not be who they seem. Carrie Rawson's case is also similar. She's the daughter of Dennis Rader, aka the BTK killer. Dennis Rader chose the nickname BTK himself, which stands for bind, torment, for YouTube guidelines' sake, and kill. He led a double life as one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. To the outside world, he was a respectable man. He had a steady job, he was very active in his church, and he appeared to be a loving family man. But behind closed doors, he was committing these horrific crimes. Carrie Rawson had no idea of the brutal acts her father was committing, of course, but her entire world came crashing down when the truth was finally revealed. Suddenly, she had to face the reality that he was capable of unimaginable violence. Carrie's struggle was incredibly public and personal. As she wrote, "I found out my father was the BTK killer when I was 26. I was in shock and I didn't know how to handle it." Keith Jesperson led a double life for years, all while keeping up the appearance of being a good, upstanding citizen. He had a family and was a truck driver, which made it easy for him to travel and commit his crimes without raising much suspicion. For his daughter, Melissa G. Moore, the revelation that her father was the happy-faced killer was absolutely devastating. In November of 2008, Melissa appeared on Dr. Phil and the Oprah Winfrey Show to talk about her father and her own experience dealing with the aftermath of his crimes. She opened up about how learning the truth about her father completely shattered her world. She described how the discovery left her feeling betrayed and confused. She also appeared on A&E's Monster in My Family, saying, "Being the daughter of a serial killer puts everything into question. Am I worthy? Do I have the right to exist when he took so much away from other people? If I'm happy, is that a slap in the face to the victims' families? I don't want it to be." Richard Beasley used Craigslist to lure victims and commit a series of brutal crimes. He became known as the Craigslist Killer, and his daughter Tanya has had to live with the fact that her very own father was the man responsible for it all. In an episode of A&E's Monster in My Family, once again, Tanya spoke about her feelings of guilt. She shared a particularly disturbing memory. "For the longest time, I just felt guilty because one of the last times I actually spoke with my father, he asked me to make him a Craigslist account. Maybe had I not even had the connection that we did have or the desire to help, do even small things like that, then maybe it wouldn't have happened." And among that personal guilt is also the fear. I don't want anyone to blame me. Now, obviously, none of what happened was her fault. She had no way of knowing her dad was this complete monster, but just imagine having to grapple with that guilt, feeling like you'd inadvertently assisted in your parents' criminal activity. Just a nightmare. Edward Wayne Edwards led a truly terrifying double life. For decades, he was a man who blended into society, working odd jobs, appearing like any other ordinary guy, but in reality, he was a ruthless serial killer. His daughter, April Velasquez, was the one who blew the lid off his secret life. In 2009, she told police about her growing suspicions that her father was involved in the killings of Timothy Hack and Kelly Drew, a young man and woman who'd gone missing in 1980. Her gut feeling came from the strange circumstances surrounding the cases and this unsettling pattern of violence that seemed to follow their family wherever they went. April recalled how she always felt something was off, saying, quote, "There were dead bodies. Someone was always killed wherever we lived." Despite her fears, though, she clung to the hope that her father was just a grumpy old man and not the monster she was growing to suspect. But sadly, her suspicions were warranted, and the reality hit her hard. She described the moment she finally learned the truth, saying, "I literally went into a panic or an anxiety attack, had to pull off the side of the road, and that's when it really hit me that all the suspicions I had about my father were true, and that he was this monster." So far we've looked mostly at the black sheep of the family, but how about an entire household of bad eggs? The Bender family ran a small inn and general store in Kansas in the 1870s. To their neighbors and travelers, they appeared to be friendly, hard-working folk, and that was true. It's just that they had an added hobby of killing their visitors. The Benders used their inn as a cover for their gruesome crimes. They would lure unsuspecting travelers to their deaths, robbing and killing them before disposing of their bodies. A lot of the time they'd also sell all their stolen goods. Their inn became infamous as the site where numerous people seemed to vanish without a trace. Their crimes were discovered in the early 1880s, but as for the fate of the Benders, there's some debate on that. Some stories go that they were apprehended, killed by a mob, or possibly even escaped. Gary Ridgway, infamously known as the Green River Killer, was responsible for the deaths of 49 women in Washington state, dumping most of them near the Green River, and for years he managed to blend in and live what seemed like an ordinary life. To his son Matthew, he was just a regular dad. Despite not being around all the time because of a divorce, Ridgway made sure to show up for important events like soccer games and even taught Matthew how to ride a bike. In a 2003 interview, Matthew talked about how his dad seemed like any other parent. He had no idea about the horrific crimes his father was committing. It's chilling to learn that Ridgway would even use photos of his son or show off his son's bedroom to put his victims at ease, pretending to be this caring father that he appeared to be. Matthew was serving as a Marine at Camp Pendleton when his father was arrested. He was living in California at the time of his last public interview, trying to come to grips with the fact that his dad had this dark side completely hidden from him for years. Mikhail Popkov, also known as the Werewolf. Popkov, a former Russian policeman, was arrested for killing and mutilating several women, mostly escorts, between 1992 and 2000. After his arrest, his wife and daughter were adamant that he was innocent, even with this overwhelming evidence and his own confessions. They just refused to believe that the man they knew could be so evil. His daughter Katya was especially affected. She'd always seen her father as a loving, protective man. She said that she always felt safe with him. In 2015, she was interviewed and was still in denial. She was a school teacher, married, and expecting her first child, though, and eventually started to come to terms with who her father really was, even consulting a psychiatrist about the possibility of her offspring inheriting any of her father's, quote, maniac traits.
Next up, we are talking about the San Francisco bank robbery of 2015. A burst of holiday spirit soured in an instant when a man in a bright red hat and fluffy white beard strolled into a San Francisco bank on a December morning in 2015. Beneath those layers of seasonal cheer lurked a criminal who slid a written threat to the teller instead of a cheerful greeting, demanding cash as if it were Christmas candy. With no sleigh bells ringing, no merry laughter echoing through the lobby, he vanished just as quickly as he arrived, blending into the sea of holiday shoppers outside, all too busy buying gifts and sipping hot cocoa to suspect a thing. The staff, left staring at empty registers and trembling in shock, learned firsthand that even the jolliest disguise could hide a pair of greedy, calculating eyes. There would be no reindeer tracks to follow, no chimney ashes to track back home, just the unsettling reminder that sometimes Santa's red suit doubles as perfect camouflage for pure mischief. At our halfway mark, we are talking about Grilla. Grilla is an Icelandic ogress who kidnaps, cooks, and eats those who are misbehaving. Apparently, she has extra special abilities that cause her to be able to sense the bad behavior in nearby towns. She will then steal them and bring them back to her home, where she cooks them into stew, which is her favorite meal, of course. She is the mother to all of the Yule lads, and apparently she also has 3 different husbands and a total of 72 ogre children. I feel like I'd also probably really hate misbehaving if I was having to look after 72 of my own children. Her children are also monsters just like her, and they love to cause trouble. It is said that the Yule cat also lives with Grilla, so she certainly has quite the full house. Maybe Grilla just needs a day off. You know, she's got a lot on her plate, it seems. Next up, we're talking about the Managua jewelry store heist of 2014. A bustling Nicaraguan storefront on a warm December day in 2014 suddenly found that the holiday spirit can mask something far darker than a jolly grin. A man dressed as Santa, flanked by his so-called elves, didn't just step inside with candy canes and laughter, they came armed to the teeth. Instead of belting out carols, they barked orders and threatened employees, sweeping through glass cases and pocketing precious gems under the cover of their merry disguise. Startled passerbys peered in from the busy streets, clueless that a staged holiday visit had taken a dangerous turn. Within moments, these red-suited thieves vanished into the crowd, leaving the staff trembling and the shelves stripped. Next, we are talking about Hans Trapp. Hans Trapp is an anti-Santa type character and comes from some regions in France. The story goes that he was actually a real man who was very greedy and very evil, and that he worshipped Satan. After being excommunicated from the Catholic Church, he decided to head to the forest where he disguised himself as a scarecrow. From then on, he made it his mission to scare and then also eat people. One day, when he was about to eat a boy, he ended up getting struck by lightning, which was God's way of punishing him. While luckily that ended the mean old man's human consumption, Hans Trapp still visits around Christmas time to serve as a reminder of what can happen to those who are naughty. He remains dressed as a scarecrow so that he can scare people into behaving well. Next, we are talking about the Dublin Santa. A crowd of red and white hats and fluffy beards bobbed along Dublin's streets in December 2013, raising funds for a good cause and spreading a sense of holiday cheer. Beneath that cheerful facade, however, one runner in a Santa suit took the festivities to a dark, violent place. With no warning, he clashed with another participant, turning what should have been friendly banter into something far more sinister as he pulled a blade and struck his fellow charity runner. Spectators, expecting laughter and music, were instead met with panicked screams and a flurry of confusion. By the time the authorities arrived, the wounded victim lay, leaving stunned organizers and volunteers grappling with the grim reality that even events meant to unite communities in kindness can be twisted by those who hide wicked intentions beneath a bright red coat and a jolly white beard. And finally on our list today, we are talking about Krampus. While Krampus was made into a 2015 horror comedy movie, there really isn't anything funny about this legend. Krampus is the anti-Santa Claus and really undermines the holiday spirit we all know and love. Legend says that Krampus is supposed to scare those on the naughty list into behaving better, but it gets really dark when we take a look at how he goes about scaring them. Krampus either beats them with birch branches, which is already pretty gruesome and evil, but he will also tie them up in a sack and haul them off to hell. Krampus is mainly a German and Austrian tale, but he is definitely recognized in other countries who have their own versions. I don't know about you, but I'd really rather get a lump of coal under the tree than get kidnapped by Krampus. How does a series of brutal 19th century crimes still haunt a city's history today? Let's travel back to Austin, Texas in the 1880s, where the servant girl annihilator left a trail of terror that shocked the fledgling city. This unknown killer targeted young servant girls in a series of vicious attacks that captivated and horrified the public. The crimes were marked by a shocking level of brutality, with victims often found in public or semi-public areas, a testament to the killer's daring and cruelty. Despite the relative simplicity of life back then, the case confounded early forensic experts and investigators who could do little more than speculate about the motive and identity of the killer. The legend of the servant girl annihilator has grown over the decades, not only because of the mystery surrounding the crimes, but also due to the social impact they had on a community still finding its footing in a rapidly changing America. Even today, the unresolved nature of these crimes sparks both historical interest and a lingering sense of dread. What if a quiet Italian countryside was concealing a horror that defies explanation? Between the late 1960s and the mid-1980s, the area around Florence, Italy was rocked by a series of gruesome crimes that would come to be known as the Monster of Florence case. Couples out on romantic getaways turned into victims in a series of brutal, ritualistic killings. The nature of these crimes, the precision, the methodical approach, and the seemingly random selection of victims has led many to wonder if there was a single twisted mind behind the carnage. carnage. Over the years, numerous theories have emerged, ranging from organized crime to occult rituals, yet no definitive culprit has ever been identified. The case not only challenged Italian law enforcement, but also drew international attention, with experts and amateur sleuths attempting to piece together the puzzle. The mystery of the monster of Florence continues to be a topic of debate, a reminder that some evils can remain hidden in plain sight. Can you imagine the shock of discovering an entire family with their lives brutally taken with no answer in sight? In 2000, the quiet suburb of Setagaya in Tokyo was rocked by a crime that defied explanation: the Setagaya family crimes. In broad daylight, a seemingly ordinary household became the scene of an unspeakable tragedy when every member of the family was found brutally slain. The case was not only horrifying in its brutality, but also in the mystery surrounding it. Despite exhaustive investigations and widespread media attention, no solid leads ever emerged to point to the perpetrator. The lack of a clear motive or any tangible evidence has left both the Japanese public and law enforcement perplexed. The Setagaya case stands as a grim puzzle, reflecting how even in one of the world's most orderly societies, a single act of violence can shatter the peace and leave a community questioning its sense of security. What dark force could be behind a string of crimes along a scenic American roadway? Our final story takes us to the Colonial Parkway in Virginia, where between 1986 and 1989, a series of brutal crimes left an indelible mark on the region's history. Over the course of just a few years, 5 individuals were found dead along this picturesque stretch of road, their lives taken in mysterious and violent circumstances. The case, marked by its eerie lack of clear motive and the killer's ability to vanish without a trace, has confounded investigators for decades. Despite the implementation of advanced investigative techniques and the passage of time, the perpetrator behind these heinous acts remains unidentified. The Colonial Parkway killings continue to be one of the most haunting unsolved cases in the United States, a reminder that sometimes evil can strike in the most unexpected places, leaving behind scars that never fully heal. Alan Wayne McLaurin was Anderson's accomplice in that same Oklahoma case. McLaurin was convicted on multiple serious counts tied to the attack, and his sentence became one of the longest in American history. Court records later described his total term as 20,750 years, with the sentences stacked on after another. Even though the legal system still technically discussed parole eligibility, the court noted the obvious: with a sentence that long, he would die in prison unless something beyond normal human possibility happened. It is one of the clearest examples of a court turning years into a message. Charles Scott Robinson, who received what Guinness has recognized as the longest jail term given to a single person on multiple counts. In 1994, Robinson was convicted in Oklahoma for horrific crimes against a minor. The jury could not sentence him to life without parole, so they did the next most extreme thing. They recommended 5,000 years for each of the 6 counts. The judge accepted it, giving Robinson a total sentence of 30,000 years. The number was almost impossible to process, but the intention was simple. The jury wanted to make sure he would never be free again. Mehmet Adnan, the Turkish founder of Clifflik Bank, also known as Farm Bank. On the surface, it looked like an online farming game where people could invest in virtual livestock and then make real money. But authorities said it was actually a massive fraud scheme that pulled money from thousands of people before collapsing. In 2025, he and his brother were sentenced to 45,376 years and 6 months in prison. This case is different from the violent crimes on this list, but the damage was enormous. It shows how financial predators can ruin lives on a massive scale without ever even using a weapon. Chamoy Tipiaso, the woman often linked to the longest prison sentence ever officially recorded. In Thailand, she ran the Mae Chamoy Fund, a massive pyramid-style fraud operation that promised huge returns and pulled in thousands of victims, including people connected to powerful institutions. When the scheme finally collapsed, the court handed her and several associates a sentence of 141,078 years. That is insane, but the strangest part is that she did not actually actually serve anything close to that. Because of sentencing limits and restrictions under Thai law, she was released after only a fraction of the sentence. Still, on paper, her punishment remains one of the most extreme ever handed down.
This is a photo of a nun, a very special nun named Miriam Selacutis. She was a real-life killer nun, and she didn't just kill once, she was a full-on serial killer, and on top of that was involved in fraud and a whole list of other crimes. And she wasn't even just a nun, she was an abbess, the head of a group of nuns. I can't believe I've never heard of her till today. A real-life serial killing nun. Miriam was a Greek nun who ran a convent with a particularly sinister agenda. Starting in the 40s, she began targeting wealthy women, convincing them to join her convent under the guise of spiritual enlightenment. Once they were in, she and her associates would force them to donate their fortunes to the monastery, using extreme and brutal methods. She was accused of embezzling the donated funds, and in some cases, she'd kill the donors. By the time the authorities started closing in, she had amassed a huge amount of property, around 300 homes and farms, and a fortune in gold and jewels. An anonymous tipster, the daughter of one of the wealthy donors, alerted the police. She claimed her mother had been coerced into leaving her fortune to the monastery, and this set off a chain reaction of investigations. The FBI even got involved after a missing persons case linked to Solacutis' convent came up. The daughter of a Greek immigrant who had gone missing in 1949 was reportedly last seen in the convent. Oh, and this is a really messed up thing. Solacutis' convent was supposedly also a place where people suffering from tuberculosis were brought, under the false pretense of it being a sanatorium. The prosecution alleged that around 150 people died there because proper medical treatment was deliberately withheld. In 1950, over 85 police officers stormed her monastery grounds and arrested her. They also found a bunch of half-naked, malnourished, and sick elderly women tied up in the basement. The young man on the right in this photo is Ben Field. You'd never know by looking at this image, but he went on to kill the old man standing beside him, Peter Farquhar, a retired teacher and author. Ben Field was training to become a priest when he began a relationship with Peter Farquhar, and would later admit to spiking his drinks with illicit substances and hallucinogens simply to torment him and make Peter question his own sanity. According to Field, he did it for no other reason than it was cruel to upset and torment Peter purely out of meanness. These are Ben Field's exact words to the jury. In the end, he killed Peter by smothering him with a pillow when he was too weak to fight back. In 2019, Field was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 36 years. Things could have gone much worse though. He had a list of around 100 potential victims, including his very own family members and other elderly, vulnerable individuals. According to him, he wanted to kill 50 pensioners in a single night. This is a photo of Father Gerald Robinson, who carried out an incredibly brutal crime in 1980. On April 5th of that year, Sister Margaret Ann Paul, a 71-year-old Catholic nun, was found dead in the chapel at Mercy Hospital in Toledo, Ohio. She'd been strangled and stabbed 9 times in a pattern resembling an inverted cross. After this, she was covered and stabbed an additional 22 times. At the time of the killing, Father Gerald Robinson was one of the first individuals to arrive at the scene and preside over the Mass for Sister Margaret Ann. At first, he wasn't suspected of anything, but as time went on, suspicions about Robinson began to grow. The real breakthrough in the case, though, came with advancements in DNA technology. In 2004, after years of investigations, Father Robinson was charged in the case and finally convicted in 2006. He spent the remainder of his life in prison and died there in 2014. This is Father Ryan Erickson. He looks a bit like Peter Griffin, but this guy's biggest sin wasn't just being the star of one of the most obnoxious cartoons ever put to screen. Instead, this man was downright evil. Sorry to all the Family Guy fans out there. I am just not into that show. Did I need to tell you that? Hopefully not. In February of 2002, Erickson took the lives of 2 men. The 2 men had been members of his church in Hudson, Wisconsin. They'd called him to a meeting to discuss some pretty serious allegations against him. The accusations included misconduct with a male juvenile and reports that Erickson had been giving intoxicants to minors. Erickson showed up with a firearm, firing at Dan O'Connell and the other man. As law enforcement began to close in on him, Erickson reportedly told a deacon at another church, "I done it and they're gonna catch me." Alright, so we've talked a lot about death, some very disturbing stuff. Let's take a moment to watch this glorious moment play out. This takes Wedding Crashers to a whole other level. Some dude had apparently come in off the street to flash everyone during a wedding ceremony. To some, mainly, I'm gonna guess the bride and groom, this man is the epitome of evil. To others, this man is an absolute godsend. Weddings are boring. The problem is it's this long, drawn-out process, but we all know how it's gonna end. You're gonna get married. Why not throw a little twist in there? I also really appreciate this man's presentation. Like, he reveals himself like an angel sent from the heavens, like BAM! Look at me, the way he just opens those doors, or whatever you call those there. Doesn't even leave immediately, he just stands there for like a while. Must have felt like an eternity to all the lucky people who were there to witness this in person. So this dude was exploring an abandoned church when he came across this. Certainly not something I'd ever want to see while exploring an abandoned church. Then again though, what exactly would I like to find while exploring an abandoned church? I don't know. I mean, you're either gonna find nothing or something bad. Some might find this dude's screaming comical, and I can definitely see that. At the same time though, it doesn't sound unrealistic necessarily. I mean, how are you supposed to react if coming across something like this in an abandoned church? Of course you're gonna scream and say some silly stuff, you know? Oh my god, what is that? I'd probably say that. I can imagine myself probably acting the same way. What do you think of this video though? Was this guy genuinely scared, or was this just a hoax? From TikToker Anelli_RG comes this disturbing video taken in church in Mexico. Apparently she'd always gotten this weird, off-putting, uneasy feeling while she was at church, and one day she decided to film during mass and picked up someone or something on camera that she didn't remember seeing in person. Take a look. In her description, she wrote that this thing was not human, and by the looks of it, I definitely agree. That is what I'd call a ghoul. Is this just poor camera quality? Well, maybe that might have something to do with it, but everyone else looks pretty normal. Whatever this thing is, it clearly stands out. The pale skin, the black pits where its eyes should be, it looks like the type of thing you'd see standing on someone's lawn as a Halloween decoration, but instead, it's just mingling with the crowd at church, swaying to the music, like, don't mind me, just a ghoul hanging at church. Maybe it's not that bad after all, who knows, but it looks bad. Alright, well this looks like it's scene out of The Exorcist, which is never a good thing. Just what in the hell is going on here? This video was apparently captured in Malaysia and shows a woman climbing the wall of a church in a really creepy, unnatural way. Not that climbing the wall of a church would ever be natural, but you know what I mean. It's the way she moves. It just doesn't look human. She looks like she's been possessed by a spider. And not Spider-Man. I'm talking about a real spider. She moves like an arachnid. Just an eerie piece of footage, real or not. Alright, this next case is absolutely nuts. This is Pastor Tracy Burleson. On May 18th, 2010, Burleson claimed that his wife Pauletta was shot dead while he was away making a brief errand, and that he came home to find her. Now initially it seemed like this was just a tragic random event, but this was in no way random, and this pastor was in no way innocent. Prosecutors found that Burleson had actually orchestrated a kill-for-hire scheme to get rid of his wife so that he could collect on a $60,000 life insurance policy. And even crazier, Burleson's son William was involved. How involved was he though? Well, he was the guy his father hired to do the job. Insane, but even weirder, this is just like ick. Burleson and his son were having affairs with the same woman. I don't know, why does that make me creeped out the most? Anyway, and this woman also assisted William by driving him to clean up and dispose of the weapon he used to carry out the killing. In 2011, Pastor Burleson was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Is this footage of a real ghost? Take a look. Did you catch that? It looks like this translucent red shape walks from right to left and then kneels at the altar before disappearing. It's pretty clear, which I really like. It's rare to see in supposed ghost videos. Unfortunately, what we still have here, though, is the hallmark of all ghost videos, the bad camera work. It looks like whoever's filming was just spun around on one of those spinny things at the playground. As for what this red entity could be, is it the ghost of someone who used to visit the church? Is it a former priest? Something darker, perhaps? Is this video even genuine? Who knows? But that's what I like about mysterious videos like this online. It's the unknown. They could be hoaxes, but there's that part of your brain that's like, maybe.